So if you remember, what does life do? It always oscillates between two opponents, right? Between chaos and order, mostly, between everything and very precise focus and things like that. That's exactly what you do with the sprint. In order to get a real grip on what you're actually doing with your project, and it will change its shape as you do this. So, and I want to repeat this because it can't be repeated often enough. Your real project is building your dream, not the project you choose here or at any later point. And never lose sight of that. Build that into your processes so that you can kill your projects if they don't help you move towards that goal. That's super hard. And I've been involved in literally countless projects and I've killed most of them. um, but it's absolutely crucial if you want to fulfill your dream, whatever that might be. Okay, let me share the screen here. Let's talk a bit about what's complicated, what is complex, and what is chaos. Any ideas? How would you make a distinction between these modes?
Is complex some sort of that you have different subsystems and there are all interconnected, like interwoven in a way, and they're
That's
all
one aspect for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
But
So, yeah, go ahead, Ina.
to me, the chaos is an unknown territory. There is a system to it that you don't yet know.
Mhm.
So it just seems super unpredictable and non-systematic. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's sort of a space with natural laws you don't know yet.
Mhm. Um, yeah, in that sense, it's very similar to the complex. So, the distinction I'd like to use is a complicated system is a bounded system with high confidence in predictability of its behavior. Right? So you know, um, you know where the 747 ends and begins, and you know what it's going to do if you push a button. You also can make a list of all the things that you don't know about it. Right? You can learn its individual aspects and how they play together, and you can predict its behavior once you've learned those things. In a complex system that's also bounded, but it is impossible to predict its behavior with precision. You can identify its disposition, it has a disposition, but it's not possible to predict what it does. Right? There's a there's a difference between complexity and what's called system dynamics. In system dynamics, we have all these interacting loops, and then then you can play with this loop and something happens over there. That was an attempt to use complicatedness on complexity. That doesn't work. It works to help you get a rough understanding of the system, but it gives you the false idea that you can actually plan and manage a complex system. And chaos is an unbounded system that it doesn't even have a disposition, right? It's you cannot plan it, you cannot sense it, you cannot. It doesn't have any boundaries, but it effectively works under the same rules as a complex system, just that it's not bounded. Therefore, it's much too large to even get a disposition. Now, we're used to collecting data and making sense of stuff. You remember the difference between KPIs and OKRs, right? Can anybody remind us what OKRs are and how they work compared to KPIs?
The first part is key performance indicators, but I don't remember the second one right now.
All right. So a key performance indicator is something that's very helpful to build a factory that boils eggs, right? You can have a very clear process, and you can measure the steps in the process, and so you have an expectation of a certain loss at a certain point. Some eggs will just drop, but you will notice very quickly if that number goes up. That's a key performance indicator. You know that something's wrong. You can immediately interact. That's complicated. If you that can be complicated, it can also be simple, but that's the typical measure for a complicated system. Now that's something that usually doesn't work with people, right? People are inherently unpredictable. So Andy Grove, founder of Intel, came up with the idea of OKRs. O stands for objective, and KR stands for key results. An objective is something that is by itself not quantifiable. Right? But that is understandable between humans. And key results are quantifiable proxies for the achievement of the objective. Right? So if you say, I want to be in a healthy relationship with my partner, you cannot quantify that, right? But you can quantify all sorts of other things, like fresh experiences you have together, amount of quality time you spend together, and things like that, right? So that would be key results for your achieving your objective, and you can cascade that beautifully down or across an organization, whether it's hierarchical or not, doesn't really matter. And this is why Nora Bateson, the daughter of Gregory Bateson, who was one of the leading stars of system dynamics, came up with the term warm data. Warm data is something that happens between humans. As you and your team have a conversation, there is something emerging between you that you know it's there. You cannot directly measure it, but you can sense it. Right? That's already showing you dispositions of the complex system that is you as a group, as a team. And of course, your project, any project that you are and will be ever be involved in the world, will be complex. And therefore, it's really, really helpful to get a grip on the, 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 the disposition of your system and how it changes shape over time, how the disposition changes over time. And that is not something that can be understood by an outsider. That's really important to keep in mind. That is only something that you as a team know is true. Okay, you as a team understand what you look at, and it's an important, valuable information system. But it's very hard for an outsider to grasp what you mean. Does anybody remember what happens in a Scrum process once you have run a couple of sprints? Probably not. So sprint. Can anybody explain what a sprint was?
Product development.
Yeah, it's for example product development, or in this case, I'm talking about Scrum, meaning software development. It's a well, usually a 2-week phase, but it can be any length of time that the team agrees on. It has a clear structure. It has a beginning in which the team agrees on what they want to achieve in that sprint, and they do an estimate of the complexity of the tasks by holding up the Scrum poker cards. Remember the Fibonacci series. Okay. So after the first sprint, they might have been off. They don't actually manage to remove the complexity they thought, or they exceeded it. But after a couple of sprints, they know as a team for this specific situation, this team with this software that they're working on, they can remove n complexity points. That's true for this team, only for this exact content. And this is how to look at these measuring systems that I'm going to show you. Right? It's related to the achievement rate of key results, by the way, in OKRs. A good achievement rate is around 75%. You don't want to be too high in your achievement. You don't want to be too low. Okay. So the first we want to look at is the system itself. So what you want to do is you want to identify the most important components in your system. What's there, right? It can be anything that comes to your mind that you sense has a pivotal role in your system. It can be a role, a specific human. It can be a force of nature. It can be a stock, anything, right? But you should list everything, you should then also boil it down to a manageable number that's somewhere between 8 and 16. At 8 and 16 most important components of your system. So the way you do that is use silent discussions all the way through. Right? For example, the team sits down, you write the components that come to your mind on Post-its, or use, if you're distributed somewhere, use Miro, or you write it down in a private file and then copy it into a spreadsheet, something like that. You can get endlessly creative on how you do that. But first, you do it privately by your own, 5 minutes or something. You write down a list of all of the components. Then you present to each other, and then you do something like Scrum Poker. For example, you could put the votes on the components. You could have votes on multiple dimensions. Remember, yesterday I offered 2 dimensions, feasibility and impact. That you can do something like that. What's the actual strength of the impact, and what is the relevance to our perspective? Something like that. And then you vote until you have distilled it down to 8 to 16. And that's not a random number. There's some science around how many total pieces of information, including the connection between components, you need to describe a complex system sufficiently well so you can understand it. That's around 40. So 40 components, including connections between your entities, whatever that might be, is sufficient for describing a complex system. Okay, so now you have this list. Now you want to know a value for each of these pieces of your system, right? But you want to make sure they're comparable. For some things, you know a number, you know carbon parts per million, for example, or you know how much fuel you can put into your 747 or whatever you can do. But what we want to achieve is we want to have all the numbers, all the evaluations in a certain range, so you can put them next to one another or in another shape. We'll see that in a minute. That actually the relation between them starts making sense. And in order to achieve that, we use the exact same method as in the Scrum Poker. We use the Fibonacci scale. Can anybody remember how the Fibonacci scale is constructed? That's very useful to know for this. 1 plus 1 is 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. 2 plus 3 is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8. Do you see a pattern? Okay, remember that pattern forever. That's when you look at a shell, right? The curve of the shell. That's a Fibonacci series. If you look at certain veggies that have a spiral, that's a Fibonacci series. Always. It's absolutely magnificent, beautiful. So use that to mimic exponential behavior. So you can say, yeah, this thing is super much. It's a lot of it. So I give it a 21. And this other thing doesn't count so much, so I give it a 3. And you, for each, and again, you do that as Scrum Poker. So each of you thinks about, what number do I assign to this thing, to this part of my system? And then you all hold up your number, and the one with the highest discusses with the one with the lowest number how you arrived there. And then you repeat that process until all of you agree that this is the number for that thing. Yes, Nina.
Do you have other examples of what this could be, like what the scale could be, other than like Fibonacci and stuff? Like, could it be like social impact, level of social impact, for example, or is that too large?
No, you can say there is. Okay, we've done happiness before, for example. So the happiness of the team could be one component in your evaluation, and then what you would like to have is high happiness, probably. Or maybe you only you don't want a high happiness because that might be a distraction. You want to have sufficiently high happiness, so you go for 13. Right? So, but that's up to you as a team. You know what these numbers represent because you have had these conversations. Right? You talk about while you might assign the social impacts at 21, somebody else might say 13, and then you have a discussion as to how you arrive at 21, and this other person arrives at 13. The whole team listens, and you together have a sense of what that actually means. This is why other external people will not have a hard time following what that actually means, right? They will say, well, how can you put a number on social impact? Well, yeah, you can't, but you as a team in your context can. Yes, Ina.
No, I was just wondering around why you sort of want us to use this kind of logarithmic scale instead of a linear one.
Because some things are magnitudes, orders of magnitude more relevant than others. Right? The linear scale never shows you that. So that's why you want to have a logarithmic scale. If for some reason it works, it totally doesn't work for you as a team, and you as a team decide you want to have a linear scale, then go for a linear scale, right? The important thing is that it works for you as a team. In my experience, it's super helpful to have the logarithmic scale, fine, but it's not an absolute necessity. It's important that you, and you will see that in a moment, you as a team really get a grip on the actual shape of your system, right? And that's easier with the logarithmic, but feel free to do it with whatever. You can also have to scale from 0 to 1 or 1 to 100. It really doesn't matter. What you need to have a repeatable process as a team to evaluate each of your components. And now here's an added layer. You do this once for what does your system that you're looking at, what numbers does that have in the desired state? Okay, so in the dream state, in the goal state, in your success state, what are the numbers that you assign to these components? Right, usually that is extremes, but sometimes it's also, but whatever it is, you want to have that as a list. That's the there then, right? What is the goal state? And what is the current state? What disposition does the system have right now? And then you put that into spider graphs, right? Or however you want to call these things. But now on the right-hand side, you see what it might look like on in your success state, right? Okay. This is how we want our system to look like. This is our desired disposition in a graphic representation. Now we have something to work towards. On the left-hand side, we have the current state. All right. Now we can really visually, graphically see what's missing. Where should we work? What's too much? What do we need to reduce? And also you see why the scale has to be normalized, right? If you put one of your measures in the thousands and the other between 0 and 1, you'll have a really, really weird representation. You don't want that, right? That's the goal. And to build on Ina's question, I really don't care how you arrive at that. It has to be repeatable, and it has to have a graphic representation. Whatever fits the need of your team is good, right? This, in my experience, has proven to work. So this is why I present it like this. But if you want to be creative and come up with other ways of measuring and other ways of representing, be my guest. The important thing is you have to be able to repeat it, because you want to repeat this every time you do a significant change, or there is a significant change to your system. So for example, every time you've run through a sprint, you want to do that. It's a very quick exercise. After a while, you get really used to it, and you build an intuition as a team for the behavior of a system over time. But not only an intuition that's just somewhere between the lines, but you can actually start pointing to it. You can build expectations for what you want to achieve in your next sprint. You say, I want this to go up, and I expect that this other thing will go down a little bit. Right? You can have that conversation. That's really valuable. And you can see whether you're actually moving towards your goal. All right. And then, that's what I just said, you repeat it again and again. Okay. Any thoughts, questions around that?
So the sort of factors, like each point sort of remains the same every time you iterate the process.
Exactly. So
Okay.
the position and and what it represents needs to stay the same, so that actually this makes sense, right? So if happiness is here, then happiness has to be here up on top all the time. Otherwise, you will not be able to make sense of it. Yeah.
Okay.
And that does not mean that you cannot revisit and change the set of the components, right? You can do that. You will probably do that, because as your system changes, its condition changes, your understanding changes, you say, okay, we didn't think of that in the beginning, but that thing should be in there. Well, then put it in, but make sure that you do a proper evaluation of the desirable state version of it as well, right? With the new components, right? So don't make this static. This is highly dynamic and fluid. This is just a representation of what you as a team sense about that system, right? And you don't have to show it to anybody outside. You don't have to defend it to anybody outside. It's a valuable tool for you to agree on what's actually happening. Because words usually are not really helpful in describing complex systems. That's what we have feelings for. Right. Okay, what else? All right. Okay. Now, Nina already pointed towards something important. And that, of course, is the impact, right? What kind of social impact or other impact might my project have, and where might I be missing something? And that's where this thing comes in. And also here, the comparison could be profit maximization, measuring success as a society as GDP. Remember that? Right? Why is GDP such an important point in our discussion? Anybody? Do you remember? Is it too trivial, or Thomas?
I was just going to say because Nixon said so.
Okay, that was fun that you remembered that. But why did he say so?
Because you couldn't loan. He felt that you no longer could base the system on gold, basically, and gold value.
No, well, it wasn't just a feeling. They literally couldn't. But why? Why was that so? Why did Nixon run out of gold? Anybody?
I guess the need for money in the world was greater than the gold supply, so it couldn't be coupled anymore.
Yeah, they weren't coupled anymore, but why was there more money? Why did the money grow faster than the gold?
Because the sum of value in society was exceeding the combined value of gold, I guess.
No.
Money is created, or
Yeah, money is created, and the way money is created makes it an exponential growth.
no?
And that's not linked to value necessarily, right? It's just money creation. That's why the money grows exponentially. So we needed something that can also grow exponentially. What is the one thing that drives GDP growth?
Isn't it just
Anybody?
the sum of value creation in the country?
Yeah. And how do you create value in a country?
Export to other countries.
Yeah. What does that mean?
You
I
sell
don't
and buy
know.
stuff, or
You move atoms, right?
what?
You move atoms and bits. And what do you need to move atoms and bits?
Energy?
Yeah. And how much energy do we use for that at the moment? I didn't say the terawatt number. I can give you the terawatt number. It's 19 terawatts at the moment. But I gave you another number, a more relatable number.
The barrels?
Yeah, exactly. So how many?
Oh, I can't remember. I think you said something about 100 million. I wrote it down though. Let me see.
That's 100 billion. And the way you
Billion.
can remember that is that 1 barrel of oil contains the energy equivalent of 5 years of human labor, which makes it 500 billion.
Yeah.
And there's an active workforce of roughly 5 billion people on the planet. So we have 100 times more, 2 orders of magnitude more energy slave workers than we have actual workers on the planet. Okay. And we have that growing exponentially as well. So the GDP is the binding element between all of that. And also the binding element between and the measure of success between political success and economic success. That's at the core of everything. But it's a really, really poor measure for example, happiness. Right? There's a GDP and happiness of a population are not coupled. Up to a point, they seem to be. There's a correlation, but after a point, they're not. So, and even the person who came up with the GDP as a measure strongly advised against using GDP as a core metric for success of a country. Still, they did it because it was an easy, straightforward way to measure stuff. But in a world that's at a phase shift, in a world that's highly complex because we have exponentials on the negative and the positive ends, meaning we have exponentially growing capabilities in terms of technologies, but we also have exponentially growing threats. And we haven't yet matched that situation with a proper measuring system. Or to paraphrase Daniel Schmachtenberger, we've extended our thumb, right? The thumb is the physical tool that made this all possible. Without our thumb, we couldn't do anything. We've extended our thumb to be able to destroy the whole fucking planet with our thumb, like literally. We have godlike power, but we don't have acquired godlike wisdom at the same time, right? That's an issue. And so one step towards becoming not more godlike, but having a more better sense of the complexity is to take apart the value system. Okay, so and it begins with what you've already done. Right? You've dreamt up a good life. Right? The economic purpose is not to maximize money. The economic purpose is to create conditions for good lives. And because we're entangled in a web of life, it's actually necessary to create good conditions for all life. So first you have to make that clear. What does it actually look like for me? Okay, now we do something similar as before. But now instead of using components, we use the 8 forms of capital. The 8 forms of capital were extracted from Conversations in the Permaculture Movement by Ethan Soloviev and Gregory Langdois around, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And they found that subconsciously or using social contracts, people in the permaculture movement were using 8 ways of looking at capital. Capital could be, and I would preferably replace it with the word potential. Okay? They were using these. The financial potential is the most abstract form of all of them. Right? You can translate it into anything. You can even design it the way you want it. It doesn't have to be designed the way we use it. If you remember the story about Bernard in the city of Ghent, then you know what I'm talking about. The material potential is stuff, right? If you have access to the material potential of some rocks, you can start building a house. Living potential and anything between a salad and a goat cheese. Intellectual potential, the propositions you can have access to. Right? So what do you know and potentially can put to use? Experiential potential. What do you have in your bones? Your muscle memory. What is the experience you've had? This is very, very close to the participatory knowing. Spiritual potential. That's probably best described by how much complexity can you bear? How much complexity can you actually integrate into your being? How much tension between opponents can you bear inside of yourself? Cultural potential. What's the binding force of your crew, of your social environment? What's there that coordinates behavior between the two, between all of you? And social potential. What can the group do together? What do you have access to as a extension of yourself in the other forms through other people? All right. Now you do a mapping again. But this time you put a definition of a good life at the center. And you put, and what you can do here, this is why this is 5. You don't have to do this, but it's very useful. You look at your dream, at your description of a good life through the lens of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay? So you say, okay, my good life, I need probably a home. You need a house, something like that. Okay, what do you need for a house? Well, first and foremost, you need some material. All right, that makes sense. So let's put material potential here, because that's non-negotiable. You cannot create your house out of thin air or financial potential, right? So you can only create it out of material potential. Okay. Maybe also living potential. You could use bamboo, but maybe there's something you need to eat. Okay, right. Living potential. It's also here. Good. How much do you know about building a house? Not so much, right? You could build something that shelters you somehow for sure. But if you have friends, you can do a little bit better. If you have more knowledge, you can do it a little bit better. And if you've done that 3 times, you can definitely do it a little bit better. So you have social potential, intellectual potential, and experiential potential, but that's not totally vital, right? It's helpful, makes it better, but it's not totally vital. So that's why it's negotiable. Right? You want to have it, but you don't have to have it. And then what's left? Does cultural potential help for a house? Maybe a little bit. Yeah. Not sure. For sure, financial potential helps, right? Financial potential helps because you might be missing something on this path. If you don't have the intellectual potential, you can somehow buy it. You can pay for a course, or you can pay for somebody who teaches you or who knows it and helps you. Okay, so it's most abstract. If you have friends, knowledge, and experience, and the stuff, you really don't need that. Right? So the stuff that you really don't need, if you have the rest, that's what you put outside here. Okay, and they do that for all the dimensions. You can use Maslow. Maslow is really helpful for that. If you have another way of categorizing that, you can use the 7 questions or something like that. Do it. Really doesn't matter. But what's important is that you go through this exercise of mapping the inputs onto that aspect of a good life. And you do that for all. And you don't only do that for all, but you do it for the now, and you do it for your dream. You want to have a comparison between the two. And then you build yourself a neat little spreadsheet, or I can share one with you. And all you do now is you count how often does each of these forms of capital, cultural, for example, appear on my segments. If you use Maslow, you have these. If you use the questions, you have 7 questions here. But effectively, you say there is layer 1 is non-negotiable. It is a value. That form of capital, 100% of it appears on this. Now, the second one is less important, so I give it 80% or 60 or whatever you want, right? That's you can negotiate that in your team. But that gives you a number for each of the forms of capital. And now that gets represented in a spider graph. So now you know, for what we want to achieve, it should look like this, but actually it currently looks like something else. Looks familiar? Okay. Then of course, you repeat. You make it present again for you. Okay. So let that sink. we'll have a short break. We meet 5 past, and then I'd like you to ask all the questions you need to ask so that you can do this on your projects. And once you have settled on one project in your group, that's what you do with that project as you develop it. So you always have a grip on the value creation, on the impact you're having. Right? From these concepts, we've derived something we call the GCP, the gross community product, so that we can measure positive impact in one of our projects in Africa. Right? This is super helpful stuff. All right. See you in 10 minutes. Okay. Questions? While you think about questions, I just want to comment on what Lars put into the WhatsApp. So the Cynefin framework, Dave's Cynefin framework is really, really good. Dave's stuff seems to, or it tends to be complex in itself. So it's definitely more complex than working with the things I've just presented you. But he has done decades of work on this, and you can listen to him on YouTube. It's definitely something to learn from. He is very contextually opinionated, so always take it with a grain of salt when he tells me something. But it's definitely, he's a great guy, really great guy. Also, I've just done a back of the napkin calculation on what each of you owes me in terms of euros. I'd say that's somewhere between 2 and 4 million. Because what I've given you in the last days through our sessions, this is the condensed version of definitely more than 10,000 hours of experiencing, learning, going really deep into that stuff. And if I multiply that with my usually hourly rate, we're already at 2 million, but I'm also saving you a lot of your time. So whatever you value your time to be, times 10,000, you can give me that too. So seriously, look at those presentations, look at the videos. Not because it's fun to look at us or me in this video, but there's some really important concepts here that are really take a long time to get your head around. Now, what I want to do, what I'm here for, is to help you get your head around and your soul around those faster. Right. All right. I have nothing to add in terms of propositions today, right? So all I can do now is give you additional information that you need to feel really comfortable to start doing this. And this means continuing to sprint. If you have questions around sprinting, and then once you've narrowed in on one project, go through the evaluation that I just presented and continue to sprint on your projects.
Yeah, thank you. This is great, and it's making it much more tangible in order to kind of combine everything you learned this and actually put it to use. So it's really great. I was just wondering before we start working on this, because it often helps me to contextualize stuff. Now we have a method, and we'll do that as much as we can. But could you just give us some, maybe one or two examples about how you have been using it and what you've like experienced from using it? Like what has been the outcome for you?
So one example we've been using the systems mapping on is optimization of effectiveness of meetings in a large corporation. And they noticed something, and the science also tells you that, and I've repeatedly said that do anything you can to increase the relaxation response, that happy meetings are better meetings. And so and that revealed some very interesting things about how people feel happy and how that extends far outside the meetings and even into the air quality and things like that. So that that changes, and that's why I said, as you progress, you will notice that you've missed out on something. So, for example, sufficient amounts of, or more than sufficient amount of plants, and not just the plants that optimize air quality in your office, but plants that are nice to look at, plants that actually make you feel good, are important, right? And that wasn't clear from the get-go. That was added, right? Do we have enough green around us here in our offices? So that's a small but yeah, pretty concrete example, I think. There's been others around waste management and but it's hard to really speak about it from without being part of the system, right? In waste management, it's one of the most important components was the CEO of the organization, because as you change your and not because the CEO makes many decisions, but the CEO had the highest change in behavior, necessary behavior throughout the company, right? How do you work with that? Right, because there's a much more complex version of this process where you look at the actual adaptive change of the adaptive work of individuals. So that builds on Ronald Heifetz's work at Harvard around leadership. The question is, can you teach leadership, and what actually is leadership? And he makes a distinction between technical challenges and therefore technical leadership, and adaptive challenge and therefore adaptive leadership. And the difference is roughly what we're working on here, right? Technical challenges are known. You can structure and organize your way out of those challenges, and that's called management. And then there's adaptive challenges that are systemic in nature, that change over time as you interact with them. So you have to adapt your leadership, right? That's adaptive leadership. And it's essentially at the core of what we're talking about here, right? And now, as well, one lens of how you can look at the adaptive leadership is, as you understand the potential system of your a change of your system over time, you can map the adaptive work of the individuals that are part of your system needed for that system's change, right? So adaptive work might be dealing with the loss of your job because your job becomes obsolete in a new configuration of the system, right? Now you know that you have somebody in the system who will strongly push back against any system change because he or she will lose their job, and they know it. Right? So now you know that. Okay, now suddenly you can deal with that in a much more informed way. You can start training that person into a new role. You can somehow help that person some capacity, right? It's obvious, right? You feel it, you know it when you look at the system, but you have to make it really graspable for everybody in the room that works on the project, on the system, and that's super helpful. Now, the behavior of a CEO and the objectives of a CEO in a waste management company, moving from a society where we extract stuff, turn it into products, and then turn it into waste, into a society where we where the waste management is at the core of the operation because it's cyclical, is entirely different, right? You might not be equipped to do both jobs. That's why the CEO was highest, right, in the adaptive work. That's the kind of stuff that helps you do that. And as I said, the value mapping, the only concrete example that I'm using it on is motherland in Africa at the moment, and on myself and my son. My son actively maps potentials between each other. So when he spends financial potential, he thinks about in what other form do I turn this into? Yeah. Okay. What else?
Thank you.
Nina.
I guess my question is for the value mapping. I get the concept, but then I'm like, I think in regards to examples, I would either need to work through it and try to figure out the different, like if we have the Excel sheet and working through the numbers and understanding what goes where and everything, and then have more questions, or see like how you move through that kind of stuff. Because I saw there was a lot of like tables and stuff that we didn't really.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
But that's not an issue. Once you get there,
right.
we just have a session, and we'll record that session and share it with everybody, so that everybody is on the same page. I think that's more useful than, or if you want to redo it right now, and I don't care. I'm fine.
No, I'm good with both. It was more that I didn't see how I would go into that and just be able to do that now. I can't see how I would actually put that into my project. I can see what the conclusion and result should be and some sort of input, but I wouldn't.
So I'm maybe I'm not getting the problem entirely. So do you want to understand how to map from the circular thing into the spreadsheet, or from your project into the circular thing? Where's the gap?
It depends on which circular thing you mean, because if I'm looking into the system thing where you first showed the spider, right? I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, we can make our own scale, then we can do a simplification of it with whatever scale we do.
That's the circular thing.
Yeah, and that circular thing, then I'm kind of like, because you mentioned the different levels and what would be where, and then it just got to a point where I got confused on what's the lines, what's the circles, what's what goes where, and yeah.
Okay. Okay. So if I make this more explicit, that will
Yeah,
probably help.
I
Okay.
think so.
I'll make a more explicit version of this. And if you still have questions, then we'll just run through them as they arise.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Could you do the same on the other model as well?
Can you?
Make an example.
What do you mean here?
No, on the other circular, like
Where?
the star for the other, the B section on the first part.
This one?
Yeah, and where did you have the star formation?
There?
Yeah. You told us to map out the project in like different components and stuff. Could you have an example of that too?
Let's do this right now. So, you're working on a porn magazine to change the female paradigm, correct? So just from the top of your head, give me a list of things and people that are relevant to everything that is in that space of a porn magazine towards changing the female paradigm. What do you need? What's there?
One more time.
So you want to produce a porn magazine that has some twist to it, and you want to change how humanity sees the role of the female.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what are the things that are relevant to this project?
What to say? Yeah, like how we communicate.
Communication. Okay, next.
To have like it would be important to have like how to say celebrities, like you people who
Okay.
have someone to look
Outreach,
up to.
celebrities, platform. Okay, good.
Like have an awesome magazine if this is what you're gonna do with a perfect setup for everybody to
Define
like.
perfect.
FOMO, fear of missing out. You really want to read it.
Okay,
if you don't
so
read it,
you need a measure of the FOMO-ness of your content.
yeah.
Okay, so you continue with that list until you reach about 20, let's say. And everybody else on your team does the same. You might have an overlap of, if you're lucky, 50%.
Yeah.
So now you have a long list of stuff. You go through that list and you find out in your team what are the most 8 to 16 most relevant things in there that you really want to track over time.
Yeah.
Okay, now
Cool.
you have a shorter list. Now with that shorter list, you give each of those items in your list a number. Right? I would give them a number on the Fibonacci series, but feel free to give them any number.
Yeah.
But they all have to be in the same scale, right?
Yeah.
And you give it a number. How is it in the end? Once you're successful, what does it all look like? And what does it look like right now?
Yeah.
And then you just give it a graphical representation. That's it. Not a rocket science.
Yeah.
Yeah? Does it help?
Very
Cool.
Thank you.
What else?
So if I understand that one, just like a follow-up on that question,
Mhm.
because in the beginning I thought that it was more that you would use the Fibonacci. Yeah, but that makes sense. Okay. Sorry, I'm thinking out loud now. No, I
But
just
you just had an insight. You just had an insight to share with us.
no, yeah, because in the beginning I think I thought that we would use the Scrum poker to kind of that we all would come up with components, and then we will use the Scrum poker to kind of which components is the most important ones that we want a part of the system, and then we would move towards the next one. But then now you're saying that we would kind of agree on which components we agree on first, and then we'd find a scale that we would rate it on, and then see like where do we want to be and where are we now, and then where do we need to work.
Well, the really exactly. So the really straightforward version is you as a group come up with a list of the 8 to 16 most important things, right?
Right.
So now I'm adding to that you can use methods like a silent discussion or voting in the form maybe of Scrum Poker to make this an exercise that helps you really understand each of those components and why you're using them. So that's the conversation is a really important part here, and that's why I'm adding these things, right? Because otherwise, remember what I said about bullet points, bullet point lists?
It
Yeah,
sucks.
sorry?
Yeah, you said that it sucks.
Yeah, I said it's dangerous actually, right? Because you have no idea what I mean if I put down a bullet point list, right? You have a lot of interpretation though, but you don't know what I mean. So you have to have a conversation, and that sparks conversation. It also levels the playing field, right? Somebody who has strong opinions and talks like me will overpower somebody who doesn't in the creation of the list unless you manage that. The way you manage that is having a silent discussion, meaning everybody has to think first and then share. Think, write, and share. That's the sequence, right? And you could do that for coming up with the list. You can also do that for ranking the list. You can also do that for anything really. It's a useful, really useful tool.
Thank you.
Pleasure. What else? Okay. I assume that you feel equipped. If something drops, I'd ask you to do the following. If you have I'm gonna use my software company as an example. Who here knows how to write software? I think I've asked that before. So when you write software, you're writing lines of code that then are interpreted by something to do something, and they're always part of a much bigger context and many interacting parts. Very complex system. So in order to be able to write meaningful code, what you need to do is you have to literally load the complex system that is represented by the software into your brain. And you're interacting with that hyper object, with that imaginary object, right? And if I've done that, and I'm sitting in front of my computer, I'm writing code, and then some annoying creature, like a manager, for example, comes and taps on my shoulder and just asks me whether I prefer salad or pizza, I'm going to punch him in the face, right? Because I just lost 15 to 30 minutes. Because that's how long it takes to really boot up that into your brain. Okay, so now coders continuously run into issues. There's something that doesn't work as expected. Why? What am I missing? Etc. So there's a high temptation to just head over to your neighbor and just ask them, "Hey, can you help me? Do you know?" So what you end up with is a beehive of coders talking to one another, but nobody codes anymore, and everybody's getting annoyed. So what we introduced was the 15-minute rule. You feel like you're stuck. You don't know how this works. You don't know what to do. And you really feel tempted to get up and interrupt somebody. Now, you're allowed to do that, but only after you've done the following. You've taken 15 minutes and you write down a precise description of your problem, and then everything you have done to solve your problem. And as you do that, something magical happens. Because until you started putting into that structure, you had the feeling that you were actually thinking, but you were actually just probably simulating. 90% of the time, people come up with a solution as they do this. Nobody needs to be interrupted. The rest, they take that file or piece of paper that they've written on, and now they're allowed to interrupt somebody. Okay? So you can reach me 24/7, and you can try when I'm sleeping or surfing, then I'm not reachable, but you can try and reach me 24/7 and never hold back, but only if you've done some thinking for yourself first. Okay? So, and I'm really happy to speak with you individually or with your teams, truly. But I wanna do this on the highest possible level. So I need you to think first and really ask some juicy questions, not some repeating of stuff we've said before. Okay. Cool. Well then, off you go. Have fun. I look forward to hearing from you.